class. It was a really good summer class. So I just really hope that everybody kind of, if you're not broadcasting online, that you kind of get prepared for it and get ready, because if this thing does hit us again, you know, I don't think we're going to be in a position where we can stop broadcasting the word of God.
Right. I agree. So guys, if you want to talk, I've muted everyone, but if you want to talk, just unmute yourself, and then you can talk. So John, you'll have to do that as well when we get ready. But listen, it's right at 11 o'clock, guys, and I guess we'll crank in, because I thank each and every one of you for your time today, knowing that you are busy, you know, pastoring, you're bivocational, whatever it is you got going in front of you. But I appreciate you taking the time today to share with us. And again, everybody's on mute. And if you want to say something to Dr. Roebuck, you can do that by unmuting yourself. Again, this is Churches Planting Churches. I'm Dwayne Lewis, I'm about to say the pastor of New Season Church, which I am, but I'm also the church planting strategist here at the Nashville Baptist Association. And always remembering that the Nashville Baptist Association, we exist in order to cultivate and connect churches throughout Middle Tennessee, in order to carry forth the Great Commission. And that's our desire, man, to just see God use churches to do that. Churches Planting Churches is all about re-engaging and reigniting the partnership and the collaboration between churches, existing churches, and church plants, in order to work at building healthy church plants, right? So that's our heart's desire to do. And today we're just going to have time with Dr. Roebuck, and as he shares with us information as far as engaging with the community, as well as he'll share a little bit out of his book, Creating Spaces. Now, Dr. Roebuck, he is the executive director of the Reverend Charlie Curb Center for Faith Leadership. He's pastored 5 churches. I think his last one was Woodmont Baptist Church out there on Woodmont out there. So that's awesome. And he's also an author. He's a graduate of Stanford University. He's a double major. I think we got a smart guy here, right? He's a double major in religion and church recreation. And he also has a master's and a doctoral degree at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So, you know, he just has a litany of great attributes about himself and the things that he's done for the kingdom of God. And he's also married. And he's a friend of mine, man. I tell you what, he's taking me out to lunch and dip breakfast, and we've had some great conversations, and really looking forward to what he's going to share with us today. So again, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Roebuck and let him go forward and share with us today for this time together. And again, thank you guys for being a part today. Dr. Roebuck, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dwayne. And you know, Dwayne, you know, has set the bar high. So, you know, he said, you know, he told you how smart I am, but I'm not really that smart. I'm just like the rest of us trying to figure it all out. And I do want to say that I really would love for today to be more of a dialogue necessarily than a presentation, because I don't come to you with all the answers. I do have a lot of experience in pastoring. I was a pastor of local churches 34 years. And so I know what you guys are going through on a week-to-week basis. I know what it's like to try to figure out what next week's sermon looks like, and how do you fix the water heater that's, you know, messing up, and how do you keep the membership happy, and all of a sudden there's a funeral in the middle of the week and you've got to do stuff that you didn't plan on doing that week. And so again, I hope you'll see me as a colleague and not as the know-it-all who's coming to tell you how to do your ministry, because that's not my heart, and that's not my desire this afternoon either. But I do want to I want to talk sort of in 3 different directions, and what I want to do is just kind of shotgun. I just want to kind of spit out a lot of ideas and thoughts, and then I'd love for us to kind of unpack some of that if we have time toward the end, and just see if any of that has struck a chord with you, or if you want to affirm anything I say, or if you want to push back against it, that sort of thing. But real quick, let me tell you what I do on a day-to-day basis. I do direct a faith leadership program here at Belmont. My goal is to help faith leaders like yourselves to be relevant to culture, to be relational to the community in which they're placed, and also to be really resolute to their DNA. How do you maintain who you are and your Christian values and your position in the midst of all the swirling things that are going on in culture? Because as you know, life does come at us fast. I graduated seminary years ago and kind of felt like at the time that I was kind of prepared to take on the world. But you know, the world has changed, right? And a lot of things that we thought we fixed are broken again and got to be fixed again. And so anyway, that's kind of what I do. I do webinars, I do workshops and conversations about important things, and would welcome you to come to any of those things. In fact, if you want to know more information or want to get added to our email list where I'll tell you about upcoming projects and things we're doing, you can email me at johnjon.roebuck, R-O-E-B-U-C-K, like Sears and Roebuck, at belmont.edu. I should have put that in the chat. Maybe Dwayne can type that in there if he's got the technologies. John, Jon, no H in my name. I got the H out of my name. So john.roebuck at belmont.edu. Just email me and say, hey, add me to the list, and I'll tell you about all the upcoming programs and events and stuff we have. Anyway, that's kind of who I am. I am married, 3 grown, married, reproducing kids. So I've got 8 grandchildren now. So yeah, I'm old as dirt, even though I'm just 39. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to pull up something on my screen that you can't see, which is by design, so I can do a little cheating, give you my notes so I don't forget what I want to say. But I want to talk first about community engagement, because I think successful church planting always begins with a healthy sense of community and community engagement. In other words, we do a better job at being the presence of Christ in the community in which we're placed if we know that community well. And one of the things that happens kind of along the way is maybe a church is started or it's begun in a neighborhood, and suddenly it's 30 or 40 years later, and the context of that neighborhood is now vastly different from what it was when the church was begun. And so the question really becomes, are we aware as a congregation what's really going on in the community around us? Are we aware of the changes, and have we adapted to those changes, or are we still trying to take a model that we came up with 20, 30, 40 years ago and make it work in the present context? I'll give you an illustration of that. I had a good friend who was pastoring a church in North Birmingham, and it was an area of town that had traditionally been an all-white area of town, and slowly the town transitioned and it became sort of a mixed community between African American and white. And then a third entity began to come in and began to have a lot of Hispanic influence as well. And so suddenly this church that had been established when it was an all-white area suddenly was still trying to do ministry with a bunch of old white guys trying to tell the whole community how to do things, right? And so what they did strategically is every time they had a chance to go through a staff change, and they didn't force anybody out, but just in the course of time, when they had a staff transition, they began to think real strategically about who is now in the community and how should we adapt our ministry mindset to match that. And so they had an open position in their music ministry, so they hired an African-American gentleman to come lead that. A little later on, they had an opportunity to transition in their youth ministry, so they intentionally went after a Hispanic member of the community to be their youth minister so that they began to reflect more and more the community around them. But anyway, one of the questions I want to kind of get at is, so why is it important to engage with your community? In other words, why should you think about partnering with businesses and organizations that are around where your church is located? Well, here's some reasons. One is churches are really good at having a vision that they want to accomplish in their community. They can have a dream. You know, God can give them an idea of what they want to do. But a lot of times churches feel as though they don't have the resources to accomplish the vision that God wants them to accomplish, because maybe some of those resources are in the community itself. And so that's why partnering with other organizations can become a very important factor. Sometimes you may even discover that 2 or 3 agencies in the area are all kind of doing the same thing. And so part of partnering with your community means that you can eliminate some duplication. if this organization is doing a really good job at feeding folks who are hungry, then maybe that's not what we need to do as a church. Maybe we need to support what they're already doing, so forth and so on. Also, though, community engagement helps us to see the community from a very different worldview than just our own. It's an interesting thing. As a church, we might think we know our community, but it's interesting if you ask someone in the community, what do you know about our church? And maybe that's two different things, and that's an important question. So a good friend of mine who's done a lot in the work of community engagement says that all of us as pastors and ministers, we have to do the work of becoming a community curator, like a museum curator. Now, if you think about a curator for a museum, an art museum, for example, they identify and acquire pieces of art, right? And so as a community curator, you can, in your role, begin to identify underappreciated and even untapped resources that are in your community that could have great value to your community. And so one of the things you can do as a curator is to begin to connect those dots, is to make sure that everyone in that geographic area understands who's there and what their mission is, what their purpose is, and how you can work collectively together and complementing each other, not competing with each other. It also helps, I think, to consider the long-term support that an agency in the community can give to the church, or the church can give to that community. We discovered in some work we're doing called Project Thrive that churches that are doing well have developed mutually dependent partnerships. In other words, if the church didn't exist in that community, the community would be impoverished by that. Or if different organizations in the community didn't exist, then the church wouldn't be able to function well. So there's really this reaching and embracing across the aisle. Someone once told me that the purpose of community is to create community. The purpose of community engagement as a church, then, is to create community. And so I think it's a really good question to ask ourselves from time to time. How are we creating community? What are we bringing to the table? And one of the things I think we have to do is we have to approach community partnering as though we're a guest in that community. In other words, we don't need to come in as though we're the great savior of the community and we're going to have all the answers. But instead, we need to become an essential part of the community that's learning how to rely upon mutual support and interaction, that sort of thing. So just kind of a beginning thing, just to think about a little bit about community engagement and why it's important. And the other thing is, no one knows your community better than you do, right? And so it's a little disingenuous, I think, for some expert to come in and say, oh, here's how you got to plant your church or grow your church. No, the way you got to grow your church is by your understanding of who is in your community and really trying to engage and to partner with that. So let me kind of jump now to a little second conversation that I want to have with you. I wrote a book a couple of years ago on creating space, and it came out right about the time the pandemic began, which is a horrible time to release a book on how do you get people to talk together, when all of a sudden you can't talk together. But here's sort of the kind of the mindset of this book. I'm gonna give you like a 2-minute version. You don't even have to read the book. But the book begins with an introduction. Just imagine that you're in a restaurant and you're coming in with 3 of your friends. And so you ask for a table of 4, right? And you sit down at this table of 4. But then imagine another friend walks in and he looks a little lost, not there to meet anybody, but you notice him. And because he's your friend, you say, hey, come over here and sit with us today. And suddenly you get another plate, another set of silverware, another glass of water. And suddenly you've opened up that space, right? And because you've invited your friend to sit with you, suddenly you begin to have conversation with that friend. And maybe you discover something that's going on in the life of your friend that you can help with. Well, I want you just sort of to take that little scenario of making room at the table, and I want you to sort of apply it to the way we're called to create space. If you think about the story of creation, God created space from chaos. He carved out a space for all living things. He created space for the sun, the moon, and the stars. He created space for the oceans to form and for dry land to appear. Created space for plants to flourish and for animals to roam and even for man to dwell. And we're made in his image. And so I think we are created with the ability to make space happen. Now, we can't create more land or more ocean. That's not the space I'm talking about. But we do have the ability to make space for things to happen, for lives to thrive, for relationships to begin to grow, for people to find wholeness. So in the book, I identify 5 areas, 5 spaces that we need to create. And I want you to kind of lay this over this idea of community engagement. So how do we create space to engage our community? And the first space that we create is what I call physical space, right? Whenever we allow ourselves to create physical space, we begin to open up our world. Now, physical space might be that you open up your office door and you say to coworkers, you're welcome to interrupt me anytime. Physical space might be that you sit on the front porch of your house instead of sitting on the back deck, right? Physical space might be that you open up your church door to say, hey, if you're a community organization, we'd love to know more about who you are. Because when you create physical space around you, then you invite people to come in and have conversational space. Now, conversations always begin at a very surface level. And we have these all the time, right? I have coworkers here at Belmont that I don't know very well, but we have conversations. Maybe we're walking to the elevator at the end of the day. How's it going? What are you doing this weekend? I hope we get some rain. Sure is hot, those kind of things. But if you begin to have consistent conversations, and you do that over time, then suddenly the conversation begins to allow a different space to be created, which I call relational space. So you go from physical space, you open the door, you allow conversational space to happen, and then you begin to have relational space. And relational space is where you begin to relate on a little deeper level. If you're on Facebook, you see sometimes somebody starting to date someone and they'll say they're now in a relationship. It means things have gotten a little deeper. But we build what I call relational equity with people. When you spend enough time getting to know someone, enough time talking to that person, then you begin to go deeper and deeper with that person. You begin to understand their world, you begin to understand their pains, their hurts, their problems, and they begin to understand your world and your pain and your problems. And so that relational equity just gets deeper and deeper all the time. And so if you let that relational space really grow, you finally get to what I call redemptive space. And that's where you're deep enough in the relationship that you can begin to lean into each other's problems and pains and hurts and anxieties, where you can begin to encourage each other, where you can begin to feel the pain that someone has. You cry with them when they cry. You rejoice with them when they rejoice. And I think that's the sweet spot of every human relationship. That's where we would like to be, is where I know you well enough that you're not just a name, you're not just a casual conversation, but I know who you are. Now think about doing that in the context of community engagement. How well do you really know your community partners, the people that are around you, the businesses that are around you, the barbershop on the corner, or the guy at the gas station, or the bank on the corner, whatever it might be? How well do you really know those people? Have you allowed yourself to build relationship space with those people that lets you become redemptive in that space? And then the final space in the book that I talk about is you go from redemptive space to reflective space. Reflective space is where you say, what is God up to? Why did God put that person in my path? Why am I in a relationship with this person? And you begin to reflect on that. What does God want me to do in this moment? Let me give you an example of how quickly you can go from physical space to conversation to redemptive space, right? Relational space. I was in the grocery store the other day down at Kroger, right? And a guy walks up to me, he's pushing his buggy, and he says, I know who you are. You're my neighbor because I see you walk by my house every single morning. I said, that's right, I do. I walk by your house every day. I said, my name's John. I said, and I know who you are. I said, you're my neighbor that lost his 24-year-old daughter last year in a car wreck. I said, I know that because people told me about that. And he began to tear up a little bit. And he said, yeah, that's who I am. And he said, I'm so afraid that people are going to forget her and they're going to forget our pain. And I said, no, we're not going to forget that. We know you that. We care about that. I mean, it was a terrible story. His daughter had a friend in a car wreck, and the daughter went to help her friend in the car wreck and was crossing the street to help the friend and was hit and killed by a car. That was the tragic story of that. Terrible story. But anyway, so all of a sudden, here we are on aisle 6 in Kroger, right by the cookies. What do you think I'm doing by the cookie aisle? But anyway, there we are. And suddenly I opened up that space, right? He stopped me and I stopped him and we began to talk. And suddenly we talked about a little deeper issue. We talked about relationship issues. And suddenly I told him, I said, I want you to know something, that every time I walk by your house, I said, I slow my walk for a minute and I say a silent prayer for your family and your grief. I said, I do that every single morning. I want you to know that. And so that became a redemptive space. He said, thank you for doing that. Thank you for being that kind of neighbor. Don't even know his full name, right? He didn't even know mine, but we just know the relationship. So just think about that creation of space. How can I, even this week with the community around me, how can I open up my door? How can I open up physical space and begin the conversation? And then am I willing to let the conversation become a relationship? And can the relationship, by God's grace, get to a point where it becomes redemptive, where I begin to really think about your life and your heart and your situation? I think one of the things that we lack right now in the American culture is the civility to get to know people, to talk to people, just to have one-on-one dialogue. So we're so divided by politics and by anger and by just everything that's going on. We've kind of lost the capacity to be a good neighbor. I mean, if you think about even how we build our homes these days, when I was a kid, our neighborhood, people had their front porch, right? And you sat out on the front porch in the afternoon and people would walk by and you'd wave to them and you'd get, you'd holler at them, hey, how's your mom getting along with her hip surgery or whatever, right? But now we build the porch on the back, right? We got our back deck and we come home to our neighborhoods and we open that garage door and we zip in and we close that door and we don't really neighbor around at all anymore, do we? So we're losing something in community by not doing that. So again, open up the space and let conversations begin. Doesn't mean you're going to be good friends with everybody you talk to, but I do think there's a level of graciousness and kindness that we're lacking that we can begin to recapture if we engage our community well. I think about Paul's writing.
Can I jump in there real quick, John?
Absolutely. Jump in there, Dwayne.
So let me ask you guys a question. Has anyone just actually had the opportunity to tap into one of those spaces, from a relational space or, the conversational space, as leaders, as pastors, sometimes it can be challenging. Maybe you had some of your members, if you got an outreach team or something that have that do that. So does anybody have any kind of experience with that or some kind of testimony with that from this point? Because I think those are great spaces. I've been with John a while and it's been very helpful in that piece. So does anybody have anything you want to share about that? Any one of those spaces? Anybody?
Oh man, I'll speak to that. I
Okay.
feel like the Lord's been super gracious to where we are in our neighborhood in Nashville, to where man, we've been able to hit a lot of those things. We literally just came off of a week what we call Serve 615, where it's an intentionality of being out in the community, serving the school up the street, different neighbors that we have in the neighborhood, where this thing, everything that you've hit on is exactly what we're trying to disciple our people into, because of the level, like, so example, we've been in the neighborhood now for just a little over 2 years. It's just now that the school up the street is allowing us to be actually inside the building.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it's not just, oh yeah, you can, clean up our bushes, you can, help our flower beds. It's like, no, we actually are inviting you inside the building to help us with some specific things. I got an email yesterday from like their network coordinator, community coordinator, where she's like, hey, would your church be willing so that the school doesn't have, what's that, parent something, what do you call that? Those
Parent
things?
Teachers.
Yeah, they don't have PTO. They don't have that. And so they said, hey, would your church be willing to raise up some people to help us start that? The last Thursday of every month is what we're looking for. And we're like, yeah, like we want to jump in on that. But that only came from being able to be relational with them over the last couple of years of building that relationship out. So yeah, I think everything you're hitting on is solid, and it's really cool to see this taking place at our local congregation.
That's awesome.
Derek, you said something really important. You used the word intentionality, and that is spot on, because these relationships don't happen by accident. Nobody's going to walk up to you today and say, hey, do you want to be my friend? That doesn't happen. But when you begin to engage with people and talk to people, and it's that, what you're talking about exactly is that cultivation of trust. You said it's taken 2 years, but now they're coming to you and saying, would you be a part? So they have recognized that you are a church in the area that cares about the people in the area, and they see value in having a partnership with you as you do in them. Sometimes we sit in our churches and we think about our community, and we decide what our community needs. And then we try to give our community what the community needs. And we don't ask the community, what do you really need? I'll give you an example. When I was at Woodmont, we went down the street to Hillsborough High School one afternoon, and we were trying to do a better job of community engagement. And we were asking schools, organizations, businesses in the community, what would it look like for us to be a good neighbor? What would it take for us to be a good neighbor? So I went down, sat down with the principal, Hillsborough High School, and I said, we want to be a neighbor. We want to be a partner. What can we do to help you? And here's what I thought he would say. I thought he would say, we need some homework help in the afternoon, or we need some mentoring program, or we need you to paint the bleachers for the football team. That's what I thought. First thing out of his mouth, he said, I've got hungry students. I need you to help me feed them. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, about 70% of our students here at Hillsborough are on government subsidy, and they eat breakfast and lunch with us. They go home to a situation where there's no food in the home, and so they eat again the next morning for breakfast and lunch with us. He said, we're grateful to feed them. He said, the problem happens on weekends. He said, these kids just don't have anything to eat. And he said, they come back to school on Monday and they're already at a cognitive deficit because of a lack of nutrition. He said, if you really want to be a neighbor, he said, help me figure out how to feed these hungry kids. I was like, wow. And we developed a burro, they're the Fighting Burros. So we started a burro bag ministry to give non-perishable food items to enough for 40 families to help them through the weekends. But again, the point that I was trying to make is that we don't always know until we ask. And I think especially now for Derek, for that school to say to you, hey, here's a problem. Can you help us with that? Jump on that with both feet, right? Say, absolutely, we can help, whatever you need, because that's what being the presence of Christ in community means, right?
Amen.
It's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Derek, for that. Ray, you had your hand. You were going to share something?
Yeah, mine happened more by just by way of illustration. We had done our programs for our young people last summer, and we did traditional VBS, but as well as day school for the community kids, especially during the COVID. It was a little rough, and and this was just by way of we mentioned intentionality, but sometimes even being unintentional, if we set ourselves up in a position where we're open, as Dr. Robick said, it helps. we had designed some t-shirts. We went on a camping trip, long story short. I forgot to pack some clothes, and my wife says, hey, I got one of these shirts that we did for the church. And it was a simple church that we had done for the summer that just was a simple campaign that said, how can I pray for you? I took that out on our camping trip. And let me tell you, I had so many conversations with people that just said, you know what, that's an interesting question. Can I ask you a question? And then conversation. I mean, I had deacons ask me, how do we go about, sharing the gospel? How do you share the gospel? What do you do in your church? I mean, responses that I would not have expected from a simple t-shirt that, again, it was one of those things where ill-prepared, my wife says, throw it on, and conversation began. And so I challenge my church, a lot of times we may look confrontational, we may look different, we may have a different color, and people stand off. But in fact, if we open ourselves to, this physical space where we're allowing ourselves to be open, and, I've worn that same shirt now for many times, various reasons. I'll go to a cashier and they'll say, I really like that. Can I talk to you? And the conversation starts. And again, it's just making myself available. It looks goofy, doesn't look popular, looks kind of off, that's not my style. But the fact that you just engage and are willing to engage, really, you'll be interested in the conversations that start. And again, I don't mean that as some, groundbreaking. It's just even the simple things we do. Sometimes we need to be mindful that, we make it sometimes more difficult than it actually is to have a conversation. And it may be culture, it may be society, or what we're getting on the headline news. But a lot of people just want to engage and talk if you'll just allow them to speak to you.
I absolutely love that idea, Ray. That idea is so that's such a wonderful way of opening up physical space. I mean, if you've got a shirt on that says, how can I pray for you today? You're saying to the world, I'm willing to engage with you today. I will talk to you today. And what an open door that creates. I remember years ago, Rusty, you may remember some of the programs we did. Maybe they're still doing the World Changer programs. You remember those? We were on an airplane flight. For some reason, we decided it was a good idea to take 52 teenagers to Greece on a mission trip, trying to get them through 4 airports and all of that. But to make sure we kept up with the crowd, we all made them wear the same T-shirt, right? And the T-shirt said, World Changers. And so I was, somewhere over the Atlantic talking to this guy, and he came up to me and he said, I see all these T-shirts. He said, what is this World Hanger organization? And the way the design was, it was kind of, he had missed the C, right? So it looked like we were all wearing these shirts that said World Hangers. And I said, oh, it's not hangers, it's World Changers. And it really gave me an opportunity to have a conversation. Then I began to think, how many of us are world hangers? We're just hanging on, or how many of us are really trying to change the world? So it kind of convicted me more than this guy. But the power of just something simple like that. I had a shirt one time just said faith on it. People would stop and say, what does that mean? Why are you wearing that? But I love that. How can I pray for you today? That's a powerful message. That's great.
I think there's so many different ways as churches how we can really connect with our community. And, if we as leaders continue to be collaborators, right? And as we collaborate with our community, I just so happened to call Derek, if you were talking about the school, we partner with the school next to our church. And I just called the secretary there, and I told her, I said, listen, God really put in my heart that, all the kids are getting backpacks. Everybody's doing backpacks this year. We're not going to do backpacks because, everybody's doing it. I said, but we want to adopt classrooms. So the teachers, classes. So could you give me a list from the teachers, what they need in their classes, right? So that way we're adopting classes. So the idea behind this is to get every family in the church so we can get all 45 of these classes adopted, to give that teacher what it is he or she needs. So again, when you talk about intentionality, and then for churches that's planning churches, it's these experiences, these things that we go through that we can share with church plants and let them know that this is how you just got to keep your hand to the plow, and creating those spaces right, for great collaboration and support. And as I think what you said, John, earlier was so powerful to me when you said that we need to be the guest. The church is not walking in with all the answers, but we need to be the guest. That was profound for me.
Yeah, let me get into one more quick part of what I wanted to say today. And if you're not familiar with a concept called asset mapping, you need to be. We do this with some of the churches we work with. Asset mapping is a strategy. It's an exercise in how you begin to help your congregation realize how much you do have to use for community partnering that maybe at first glance you don't think you have. Because we're humans, so often we come into a half full mentality, right? We don't have enough. I mean, a half empty instead of a half full. Think about the feeding of the 5,000, right? Jesus is on the hillside one day and he says, we got to feed all these people. And, the disciples come back and say, well, it'd take 200 days wages. We can't do all that. And Jesus says, what do you have? And the guy comes back and says, Philip says, we got 5 fish and 2 fish and 5 loaves. And Jesus said, okay, that's enough. And he takes it, he breaks it, he blesses it. They feed 5,000 with it. So sometimes, and the point I want to make is it's not how much we have, but how much we think we have. Because I like to think that we really have more than we can imagine. I want you to think about an old-fashioned potluck supper. Maybe your church still does that, right? Everybody brings their best dish. And when they do that, you put all the dishes on one table and the feast is greater than any one person could have ever produced, right? And so that's sort of what asset mapping is. And it's a process, and I would love to talk to you a little bit more about it, but I want you just to think with me for a minute about if you were able to sit down with your congregation and ask them to consider what are the assets that you can bring to the table. Most of us don't consider all that we really have. And so when I do this work with churches, I'd be glad to come even share it with your church, is we get people to think about their assets in 5 different categories. We say to people, first of all, what are your physical assets? Ask your church members, what are things that you own, things that you can touch and see? Maybe you've got a ladder. Maybe you've got a house. Maybe you got a car. Maybe you got a lawnmower. Maybe you got a cell phone. Maybe you got a wheelbarrow. But you begin to let people just start writing down on a piece of paper, here are things that I own, right? And then we ask people, say, all right, what are your individual assets? What are your talents? What are your gifts? What are your abilities? What are your experiences? In other words, what are you good at doing? What do you know something about? Somebody says, well, I know how to garden. I can grow a garden. Somebody says, I can do mechanical stuff. Somebody says, I can paint. Somebody else says, I can teach kids. And you begin to list those kind of individual skill sets. And then we say, what are your associational assets? What are the networks of people to whom you're connected? Do you belong to a swim club? Are you in a reading group? Are you a member of a band? Are you in a car club? Are you in a neighborhood watch group? What does that look like? And we say that's another asset to think about. And then we say, number 4, what's your institutional asset? In other words, what agency or corporations are you connected with? In other words, where do you work? Where do you volunteer? Have you ever worked with Habitat for Humanity? Are you an employee at Amazon? Are you a firefighter? Are you a custodian at a local restaurant? Do you teach at a local high school? In other words, are there institutional assets that you could maybe make available? Like, hey, I work at a school and I think we could use the parking lot one Saturday if we want to do it, right? That's an asset you bring to the table. And then the last thing is to say, what are the economic assets? What spending power do you have? Do you have any kind of way of making money, or how do you spend your money? Do you have a full-time job, a part-time job? Do you have, any discretionary money, yada, yada, yada. So you begin to let people write on a piece of paper, here are all the different assets I didn't know I had. And when I do this with the church, we put all this up on a big wall. We get everybody to put up all their assets on the wall. And then we start to connect the dots. We let people sit back and look at like, all right, this would work with this and this would work with that. And you begin to see ministry initiatives that could emerge. And then you say at the end of the night, and you take about an hour and a half to go through that with the congregation. You say, all right, if you're voting on one of these initiatives, which one would you want to be involved in? And people go and stand by that ministry initiative after you've begun to rearrange that listing of all those assets. And it's such an encouraging and eye-opening process. Suddenly people say, oh, we could start this ministry. We've got assets to do that with right now. It's not that we've got to raise money or get more people in church first. It's no, we've got that. I was doing this with a group of students, undergraduate students here at Belmont. And I said, let's just pretend that we want to do something in our community. We want to start a business. I said, what are your assets? And we started listing assets. And one guy said, well, I got a pickup truck. And another guy, we went through all this stuff. They had decided as a class, their pretend business was going to be, they were going to repaint swimming pools because they know out in Green Hills, a bunch of rich folks got swimming pools. I said, what if we start a business repainting swimming pools? And so one guy says, well, I got a pickup truck. Another guy says, well, I worked for a paint company last year. I can get paint cheap. Another guy said, well, I got a cell phone. I can make some calls. And so suddenly they began to see that they had assets they could work together that maybe they had not seen before. So again, it's the power of community within the church that allows you to reach the community outside the church, because you begin to see what you have in common, or what you have collectively, I should say, that you can use for the common good. So I've said asset mapping is a bigger thing than what I've given it time to even discuss today. Love to talk to you further about it at some point, but there are ways, though, of identifying resources you have in your church that maybe are underutilized just because you haven't never asked. Maybe somebody is a great art teacher. You don't know because you never asked them about that. Maybe somebody has skills in brick masonry and they can help build a wall. Maybe there's a business that's got a dilapidated wall and needs help. You never know until you start asking. So that's, again, Dwayne, I've thrown a lot of stuff to everybody real quickly. And now I'm going to say, what questions you got?
We may end up having to do a part 2 someday soon, really soon or something too. But yeah, John, I thank you so much, man. You rock awesome. And though that these assets he's talking about now, we've actually did that in our church, and it has been very, very beneficial, to be aware of the gifts, the talents, the assets that you have within your church. And, even as a church, we realize those assets that we have, and how do we use those to empower our community and to also to multiply the kingdom of God through building successors in order to, or build church planters in order to go out and plant more churches. And I really believe that mobilization and multiplication goes together, and the more we partner and collaborate with our community and get to know them, the closer we can get to, building more disciples, right, to the Great Commission, right? So let's be a guest next time I go to a meeting in our community, right? I'm going to be the guest, right? And I want to know what's on their hearts so that we can make an impact with them. And it's good to have Rusty. Listen, we about reached our time, but it's good to have you, Rusty. I don't know if you want to say something before we get off here today. And it's definitely a joy to have you. Rusty is our DOM at the here at the National Association.
Well, you're on mute, Rusty.
Take it off mute, Rusty. Mute. Wait a minute. Let me see if I can take him off here. You don't mute.
I know. I'm at home with COVID. It's just good to drop in with you guys for a few minutes.
All right. Well, thank you, Rusty. We appreciate you so much. And listen, guys, again, thank you. Dr. Roebuck, thank you so much for sharing with us. Does anybody have any questions, anything you would like to ask or share before we end this webinar on today? Everybody good? Awesome. Well, guys, God bless y'all so much. Matter of fact, I think I need to set up a time with everybody on here. Go to lunch or something, right? Go hang out and talk about some things, what's going on. But
Hey,
listen,
be careful though. If Dwayne invites you to lunch, you're going to pay for it, not Dwayne. So just be careful. Know that's coming. Just, he's tighter than last year's bathing suit. You know what I'm talking about? So
see, I told y'all John and I were real good friends, right?
that's right.
Listen, John, thank you so much, Dr. Roebuck, really, honestly, man, for being a part of this with us. And God bless each one of you guys. And may God bless your churches and everything that you endure. Listen, remember that you got to keep on dreaming, because if you keep on dreaming, somebody else is going to wake up. Come on. Ooh, that's a word right there, y'all. Y'all better embrace it. Keep dreaming so somebody else can wake up, y'all. God bless you. We'll talk to you and we'll see you. Listen, the next one we'll do be the last Tuesday of August. And I'm talking to Derek Delane, and I'm gonna see if I can get him on here with us and share some things in our next month webinar here. So that's going to be the last Tuesday of August. So look forward to seeing you guys join me. Hey, you have a good day, y'all. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks.